Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining Focus today. It is an honor and a privilege to introduce our next guest. Please just remember to keep muted and cameras off until Q&A. You are welcome to add your Q&A into the chat box for Anna to answer at the end of the presentation. Any further questions, you can wait until there. Anna, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, and thanks for having me. Quick disclaimer, I'm at a conference this week, so I'm not able to control any of the background sound. So bear with me with that, but thank you for taking the time out today to talk about Social Security. And I was sharing earlier that I really want to be sensitive to the fact that this is new information, and I've done this for a minute now. And so it's one of those things where you kind of take it for granted. So any questions that you have, just put them in the chat box. I will try to make what is a somewhat muddy process as clear as possible. I know that there's a lot riding on this for you. I know when my son turned 18 and it was time to apply, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how that process worked. I knew this was a vitally important benefit that he was going to need really for the rest of his life. And so I didn't want to screw things up, and it was kind of scary. So I understand the investment that y'all have with this subject matter, this content, and I just want to commit to you that I will do my very best to help make this understandable and to answer all of your questions and to make you feel comfortable and empowered to be able to take this on as well as you've taken on everything else. So thanks again for this opportunity and this time. What we're going to do today is I want to jump in to help understand the difference between SSI and SSDI. They're two very, very different programs. They're both managed by the Social Security Administration. So understanding what each one means is going to be very, very important. So we want to talk about those differences and how that works. We'll talk about how the health insurance goes along with these benefits. So every adult that has a disability, they're going to need three things. They're going to need some form of income, some form of health insurance, and some level of services. And what we're really talking about today are the first two. So we're talking about the income that you get through SSI and SSDI, but we also talk about the health insurance that is concurrent with that and what waiting periods might look like and so forth. So we'll get into that detail as well. I want to bring it down to the nitty-gritty of what does that application process really look like? What do you need to do to be prepared for that? And what criteria do you need to look at in terms of securing that medical determination of disability? So it's all unique. And, we go through this whole person-centered lifestyle, with our guys. Everybody is unique and different. So how does that condition impact that person? So that's really what Social Security is looking at. In a way, you can argue that Social Security is being person-centered because they're looking at, okay, here's the disabling condition. How does it impact that person? And then I also want to talk about, once you've gotten awarded, yay, what are some other considerations to look at that, how to make sure that you're maximizing that award, and what you want to think about in terms of having your individual work while being a Social Security beneficiary. How does work impact those benefits? So we're going to try to talk about a lot of ground today as it relates to Social Security. But just to kick it off, let's start with supplemental security income. What is SSI? So SSI is a needs-based program. So this is, while it's managed by Social Security Administration, this is actually not in the Social Security Trust Fund. This is money that's in the regular federal budget. This is public welfare. If you have a lot of needs and you have a disability, then you may be eligible for SSI. So when you think about SSI, you think about a two-part test. You think about, first I have to show the financial eligibility, and then I have to show the medical eligibility. So it begins with that needs-based piece. So who applies for SSI? Generally, when individuals are turning 18, that's the vast majority of applications that I'm helping people with, because when you turn 18, you're an adult, right? So when my guy turned 18, what that meant in terms of filing for SSI was that if I had filed for SSI prior to him turning 18, he wouldn't have been eligible because they would have looked at my income. But when he turned 18, they looked at, well, what income does he have? Parents' income doesn't count when you're applying for SSI at age 18. Child support does, but the parent's income does not. So again, it's a means tested program. You got income limits and you have resource limits. So income limits, that would be because the individual is likely not working, there may not be any income in that sense. Again, child support is viewed as countable income, so you would look at that. What we're also looking at are resource limits. And so the resource limits, because SSI is tied to Medicaid, those Medicaid resource limits are always going to be applicable, which means that when you think about all the assets that that individual may have, whether it's a bank account, a savings account, all of that, how much money they have in their wallet, it can't go over $2,000. So $2,000 is like the magic number or that threshold number that we want to look at for means testing for resources for purposes of SSI and Medicaid. So again, SSI is always going to consider that countable income and countable resources in determining eligibility. That's part of that. The first thing that they're going to do when they get your application, they're going to screen for financial eligibility. And only when you've gone through that process does the case move over to disability determination services for the medical eligibility. So SSI and Medicaid go hand in hand. As soon as you're awarded SSI, you're going to get that Medicaid card. Keep in mind, Medicaid is the payer of last resort. So it's not, when I look at how we use Medicaid, there aren't a bunch of doctors that are going, woohoo, we take Medicaid. But where it's wonderful is as a secondary to our private insurance. So I've got decent insurance, but Medicaid will step in and pay the copays for my son's medications with things that are kind of catastrophic in nature. Last summer, he broke his ankle. We had to get surgery. We had to get screws put in and all of that. $67,000. Medicaid picked up the remainder of those bills, so we didn't have to pay anything out of pocket. Yay! So yeah, Medicaid is really, really a beneficial benefit, particularly when you think about long term. I know, we've done other sessions before. We were talking about Medicaid waivers. Medicaid waivers are funded through Medicaid, so you have to maintain Medicaid eligibility in order to continue to be eligible for those services as well. So Medicaid eligibility and access to Medicaid, really super, super important. So why do people lose their SSI and Medicaid? Most frequently, they're not paying attention and the financial resources go over that 2,000 mark. And this is really important. If you become the individual's rep payee, it's your responsibility to help your individual manage the SSI so that always Medicaid compliant. So you want to make sure. I had a case, this is a few weeks ago, where the mom was like, well, I was trying to have him do it himself because I'm trying to promote independence, but they got themselves in a little bit of a pickle because they let the financial resources go over 2,000. And so for each month that they were over 2,000 and SSI paid them, they have to give that money back. That's an overpayment situation because technically they weren't eligible that month. So securing the benefits is a challenge, but also there's ongoing and continuous due diligence to maintain those benefits. It's not that difficult. It's just that you have to be aware and you have to kind of stay on it. So like on a monthly basis, I'm checking in my son's account, making sure, you know, his account is well below the 2,000 mark. So that gives me a good night's sleep. I know that we're not at risk of losing his Medicaid eligibility. So, but yeah, exceeding those financial resources, number one cause of overpayments. So what if you have SSI and Medicaid and you're trying to save? What do you do with that? That's where ABLE accounts come into place. So ABLE accounts and supplemental needs trusts are both legal instruments and mechanisms that allow you to have a safe harbor for these resources. So what I counsel individuals on is, yeah, have your bank account for transactions, but don't have a savings account if you have SSI. Have an ABLE account instead. So any money that you would have put in a savings account, that can happily stay in an ABLE account, and you're assured that you're going to be able to maintain that $2,000 bar to ensure ongoing eligibility. So that's SSI, needs-based. What is SSDI? SSDI is an entitlement program. So an adult-dependent child who has SSDI is going to be viewed as a childhood disability beneficiary. They used to call them adult-dependent child, but now the nomenclature is more this childhood disability beneficiary language. So how does an individual become eligible for SSDI? How do you know which one am I eligible for? Well, it's all going to be based on factors including, is the individual working? Has that individual earned enough work credits where they're eligible for SSDI on their own work record? Or are they in a situation where either mom or dad is deceased, so they're having survivor's benefits, or retired? And when I say retired, I mean retired and drawing Social Security retirement, not I'm retired, so I'm not working, but I'm delaying my withdrawal of SSA until I, hit full retirement. So it means retired and drawing SSA retirement. And then the individual needs to be disabled, having that disabling condition. So if I were disabled, then what that would mean for my son, who's currently on SSI, if I start drawing SSDI because of my disability, then that makes him eligible on the basis of my work credits. That's what an adult dependent child is you're basically tagging on to the parent's work record, and that can last over the course of the individual's life. So one of the key features of this is that the individual must have established that disability prior to age 22. So the onset of the disability. Sometimes you're not determined disabled. You have a lot of families that don't apply when they're 18. So I have, people in their mid-20s or mid-30s. I even had a guy in his 50s and we're applying for the first time. But the condition itself, the onset of the condition was prior to age 22. And that's what you're trying to show as part of that medical piece. Yes, you can be a concurrent beneficiary. You can have both SSI and SSDI. And typically the way that works is with an individual who is working. So let's use my son as an example. So he's 29 now. He started on SSI when he was 18. Guess what, guys? He just got a, quote, real job with BDI, yay, and he's working in the warehouse. And what do I mean by a real job? What I mean by a real job is that not only is he getting paid, and I mean paid that's more than that sub-minimum wage. So if he was in a workshop at a program, he's getting a $2 paycheck. So he's making at least minimum wage, but he's also paying into FICA taxes. And so because he's paying into those FICA taxes, as he's working, he is slowly but surely earning work credits towards Social Security. So eventually he's going to hit that mark where he has enough work credits and he'll be eligible for SSDI on his own work record. But it's going to be tiny, tiny little check because he's not working that much and he's not making that much. So the government doesn't want him to be at a worse than situation. So he would be a concurrent beneficiary. He would receive a small SSDI check, and then he would receive the difference in SSI to keep him at that national level, which is 841 in 2022, and it goes up every year. So in January, it'll probably go up to 870 or so. We'll find out. They should let us know later this month. It's October. Those numbers usually come out pretty soon. But generally what you see is that individuals transition to SSDI when their parents retire. That's the most common thing. And so how that process works, let's say if I were going to retire today, woohoo, that'd be cool. So I'm retiring, I go to Social Security, I'm completing the paperwork. They're going to ask that $1 million question, do you have an adult dependent child? Yes, yes, I do. And so that's going to link our files. That's going to enable my son to receive 50% of whatever my award is. So if I get 3,000, he's going to get 1,500, which is going to kick him off SSI, right? Because it's higher than the SSI amount, but he's still going to be able to maintain his Medicaid because the childhood disability beneficiary designation is a protected class. There's actually 34 forms of Medicaid in Georgia. So right now, his classification of Medicaid is tied to his SSI. When he comes off SSI and is on SSDI, he'll have a different classification of Medicaid, but it's going to act the same way. It's still straight Medicaid. So that, again, the health insurance part is really, really important. There is a waiting period, a 24-month waiting period for a childhood disability beneficiary to receive Medicare. So having said that, there are also special Medicare plans that your child may be able to access that is not related to your status as, you know, a survivor, a retiree, or an adult disabled worker. So I'm learning more about those processes. That's something that is kind of a new thing to look at. But it would be, let's say if you were looking at private health insurance, being eligible for this form of Medicare might work better for you. So if y'all want more information on that, just send me an email and I can forward that information to you. So let's fast forward to the time when an individual actually has that SSDI. So they have SSDI. Now they have Medicare because they've gone through that waiting period. They're maintaining their Medicaid because they're a childhood disability beneficiary. But we also want to add that other classification of Medicaid called QMB Medicaid, because that's another form of Medicaid that's going to pay for Medicare premiums, deductibles, and co-insurance. So lots of different kinds of benefits. And so as you go through this trajectory of life, it's good. Like right now, this is good just to know. It's like, okay, I'm going to tuck this in my hat for future reference. Rules change over time, but just have awareness of this so that you know that, okay, when this time comes, there may be an opportunity for other benefits. And it's always advantageous to, you know, have access to, you know, a financial planner or, you know, other professionals who work in this field who can provide guidance along the way, because it does change over time. So the classic case is that individuals are starting their SSI at age 18. We do have some folks who are on the Katie Beckett deeming waiver. So the deeming waiver is simply access to Medicaid. What they're waiving is the parental income, so that because of the significance, the impact of their disabling conditions that warrant them to need Medicaid, they're able to access Medicaid through that door. So if you have the Katie Beckett deeming waiver form of Medicaid, when you're transitioning transitioning to SSI Medicaid, it's a different form of Medicaid. In other words, that Katie Beckett Medicaid's probably going to cover more therapies than your traditional straight Medicaid. So there are some differences. And this is really important when we're talking about when should you apply for SSI. If your loved one is on the Katie Beckett deeming waiver and they're turning, like if they were turning 18 today, mid-October, we would want to file the first week in November. You want to always file the month following their 18th birthday, but you want to do it, pretty quickly. That's just going to maintain continuity. You can take that summary of your SSI application, give it back to the Katie Beckett unit office, and that's going to allow for continuation of that Medicaid, which is exactly what this slide was. So I jumped ahead a little bit there. So again, it's a lot to balance with understanding all of these processes, but the general case is that you're applying for SSI at age 18. If the family's income drops below that federal poverty line, then yeah, that child may be eligible for SSI, notwithstanding the parent's income. The issue there that you just want to be careful of is, again, it's pretty easy if you have a child with parents working that are on SSI. It's pretty easy to get into an overpayment situation. And unfortunately, I've had a number of cases where the parents were working and they got into an overpayment situation. And it's like the child gets left holding the bag, because then when the child turns 18 and they're transitioning on their own work record, they're not going to be receiving the full award, because they're going to be taking money back from that overpayment situation. So always, if you're on SSI, always be managing that income threshold. You always have to report those earnings, and you got to manage the savings part. So it's income and resources with SSI. So how do you actually apply for Social Security benefits? During the pandemic, all the offices closed. They transitioned a lot of their workers to remote. The vast majority of applications were done online. The offices have reopened now, and so you have more of a choice. You can apply online. You can set up a phone appointment, or you could set up an in-person appointment. So it's up to you, whatever you're most comfortable with. But if you were going to start by applying online, then you would be going to this ssa.gov site to initiate that application process. When I'm working with individuals, I have an SSI starter pack, and it has this adult disability report in it. It has their standard release. It has their function reports in it, just to give you, some insight as to what those reports look like. That 3368 adult disability report, I call that the cheat sheet. So I have families go through that, and to the best of their ability, and then let's review it. Let's see what it looks like. Are you inclusive of all conditions? There's an opportunity in section 11 to write remarks. Use that section to go, okay, here's a snapshot of what's going on in our lives. Because sometimes, depending on the disorder or disabling conditions, sometimes proving that severity of impact can be challenging. So the adult disability report, that's your form to help get you started. If you were to apply online, you don't get to upload that form. In fact, you don't get to upload any forms with the initial application online. But what you are able to do is minimize the amount of time that it's taking you to complete that application because you've done that 3368. There's only a couple of questions that are on the online application that aren't on that 3368. One is, what's the city and state that the individual was born in, and then the other one is does the individual have a bank account? So how do you know what documents to provide to Social Security? You use the Blue Book criteria. That's going to drive what the expectations are in terms of documentation to secure that medical determination of disability. Um, so we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. It's important to know that everybody who has an SSI application, you're also going to be screened for SSDI, because again, SSDI is an entitlement program. And sometimes that's scary because it's like you submit your application and they are fast with those denials. And then, you get that thin envelope 2 weeks later that says, you've been denied. And it's going to say, it's pretty explicit, you've been denied because you haven't worked enough, you're not working, you haven't earned enough credits. And in the upper left hand corner, it's going to have, this is survivors retirement disability benefits, and you go, oh yeah, I was expecting this. And you just fold it up and file 13 it. Your SSI application is still pending, but every SSI application has to be screened for SSDI first. So again, it's a two-step process. The SSI applicants, they're going to go through that financial eligibility interview. And then once they've been approved for that, then they go to the medical determination services for the medical review. That financial eligibility interview it's pretty straightforward. There's a lot of questions, and you're just going, nope, nope, nope. They want to know, they're trying to ferret out any income and any resources that the individual may have. That's, are you financially eligible? So, are you working? Do you have a bank account? Do you have a savings account? Do you have an ABLE account? Do you have a trust? And then other stuff. Do you have a railroad pension? Have you worked in the military? Did you win the lottery? Do you have mineral rights? There's a lot of questions that they go through in that financial eligibility interview that, you just have to say, really, if I were sitting on a gold mine, I wouldn't be at the Social Security office, just saying. And again, guys, I apologize for all the background noise. I thought I was in a quiet hidey hole for our conference, but then it's kind of lit up lately. So I appreciate your patience with me. But yeah, so first is the financial eligibility interview, and then on to disability determination services. So when it goes to DDS, and here's the thing, Social Security has their disability adjudication services. So you can get, when you get a letter from them saying, hi, I'm your case manager, it may have Social Security and they're on the envelope, but it may have some other group. Social Security will outsource to Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency using their determination services adjudicators. So that can be very confusing because you file for SSI, but then you get an envelope from GVRA and you're like, what? And you think it's all convoluted, because it's confusing. So just be aware that you could actually get correspondence from both rehab or some other disability determination group. If Georgia is full, if they have too many cases going on, they will outsource to other states. So you could actually have others doing the adjudication. How do you know what criteria? You want to look at the Blue Book. So the Blue Book is going to drive that medical determination requirements. And you can just you're at your computer right now, you can just Google Social Security Blue Book and then put whatever the condition may be. And I had an individual that I'm working with who was blind, but also has other conditions. Well, they had really straightforward paperwork regarding the vision impairment. So that's going to be our leading documentation. So it's looking at what that criteria is, and then you doing the groundwork to make sure that you have the medical documentation to give to Social Security. Now, theoretically, Social Security is not going to require you to do that. Theoretically, you can go into the Social Security office, sit down, have an interview, and then sign the release, and then just walk out and we'll see what happens. What that does, though, is you're surrendering your own narrative at that point just by signing a release, because you have no control over whether or not the doctors that you've listed in Section 8 of that application are actually going to provide the appropriate medical documentation to demonstrate the severity and impact of that condition. So, yeah, I tend to encourage folks, let's look at what documentation you have. Let's gather the documentation. Let's make Social Security's job a little easier for them by providing all of their appropriate documentation in a pretty neat little bow. And then that way they're going to have everything that they need to be able to make that determination. There are some conditions that are a compassionate allowance. So that's always something that you want to check. Is my kid's condition a compassionate allowance? A compassionate allowance means, wow, they're going to get a determination of disability in 30 days or less. Some conditions, because of the severity, may be eligible for a quick determination. Right now, before the pandemic, most of the cases were getting resolved in like 4 to 6 months. Some, like if I had an individual with Down syndrome, we're going to get that in about 30 days or so. Even though it's not listed as a compassionate allowance, Down syndrome is treated like a compassionate allowance, so it's really, really quick. But then you have a case like autism. Autism is not a compassionate allowance or a quick determination. It's going to go through that whole adjudication process, and now that process is taking between 8 and 10 months. And I have a couple of cases that are taking a little bit longer, and I'm talking about 8 to 10 months to that initial decision. And if we were to get denied, then that means we're going to go through reconsideration. We're going to add another 8 to 10 months. And then if we're denied, we have to go to a hearing, we're going to add months on top of that. So based on the condition, it can be a much longer period of time. But again, I strongly encourage you, this is me jumping up and down, encouraging you to gather the medical documentation and provide that to Social Security. And Social Security will even say, we don't need that. You don't need to send that. And they may even try to push it back, but no, you keep pushing it back to them. Make sure that adjudicator has the medical documentation. You do have to sign a release. Your application, if you're filing online, that application is not going to be viewed as complete until they receive that release. They also want to see a wet signature. So now the process online is you apply online, and then Social Security sends you a copy of that application with a little signature line on it. They want the wet application signature of the individual along with the release, and then that's viewed as a complete application. Then they do the financial review, then it goes to that medical determination. So again, you can just Google Social Security Blue Book and then the condition, and that's going to tell you the criteria. For some conditions, and let's pick on autism. My guy has autism, so this is what we were looking at, is you show the diagnosis. See, here's his psych eval that says he has autism right there, or an IEP. He's receiving services because he has autism, but that's not enough. They want to see the severity and impact. They want to see through all of your documentation that he has diminished mental residual functional capacity. And so that's 4 criteria to mental residual functional capacity. That's understanding, processing, and memory, concentration, persistence, and pace. And so that could be like, if he has ADHD, yay. So that means he gets easily distracted. He's going to need help staying on task. Persistence means, sometimes our guys get overstimulated or overwhelmed and they shut down and they stop. So that is persistence, that ability to kind of push through and keep at that task. Or pace. I had one guy who was able to do the work. He was just extremely slow. And so that made him disabled from their perspective because he had extremely marked limitations with pace. Social interaction, that's again where you're documenting some of the challenges that an individual may have. Adaptability, generally what I'm focusing on in adaptability is how an individual is going to respond if you take away all the structure. Like, okay, we have this guy with autism, he's doing pretty well in school, but look how much structure he has in that school. You take away that structure, what happens? What happens when he has to deal with change? So adaptability is sort of like a resilience test. And so like my guy, even at age 29, he's going to fail the adaptability test. We had a power outage this morning in Snellville, and that was like, so already his day is starting off a little wonky because coping with that change, coping with that difference is hard for him. So, but this is mental residual functional capacity. You also have physical residual functional capacity. So there's a whole other level of standards related. And it's primarily based on stamina and strength and endurance and levels of fatigue and things like that. But yeah, you want to look at the blue book. That's going to let you know what the criteria is for autism. It's the diagnosis itself and getting the documentation to show this. And so this is where IEPs can kind of hurt you because most IEPs are strengths based. I mean, like if I had a nickel for every time, Eric is a delightful child. Yeah, he's a delightful child, but he's got a lot of issues. So sometimes they're so strengths based that an adjudicator who is not clinically trained can look at that and go, okay, I get it that he has autism, but he still should be able to work, right? So being able to have a current psychological evaluation that has adaptive function scores on it is really important. Likewise, I've developed an assessment that I use for initial applications. It's a level of need assessment. It's basically a clinical interview that I do with the parent, and we talk about what risk levels we have, what support levels are needed for activities of daily living, behavioral issues, and general health. And it results in like a 13-page report. But if you're an adjudicator and you receive that, there's going to be a lot of language in there that's going to point to this diminished mental residual functional capacity. So it helps kind of push the case over the finish line because you have documentation that's to their standards. I have another assessment that we utilize is sometimes I call the Stone Mountain Adjudication Office where good cases go to die. They rubber stamp denials. They do. I was like, it would be really helpful if you read this, but sometimes they don't. So I have another assessment that I do at the reconsideration level that is specifically mapped to have one for mental residual functional capacity, and I have another for physical residual functional capacity. And those have proven very, very successful, again, in pushing that case over the finish line so you get that award. Function reports. In my starter pack, I go ahead and I give you the function reports. There's an individual function report and there's a third-party function report. And a lot of times the adjudicator will receive the application and will just send you the function report. And I have had a lot of families go sideways with the application because the parent completed the function report. And even if the parent's name is on the bottom of it, they're going to still think that the person did it. So like, well, this person's pretty articulate. Look how well they described, it's like, no, that was the parent, so, you have the individual complete the function report and then the parent completes the third party report. And then that gives nice perspective. Like if my guy were going to try to complete the function report, it's going to be an incomplete report. Some of the words they're trying to write is going to get a slant down. I mean, it's going to be pretty obvious just from his attempt to complete the function report that we've got some significant disabilities going on here. So those function reports are not something that you initiate. They're something that you respond to. So when we do the application process, and say if we're applying online, Then we get the copy back with the wet signature. We're going to mail in all of the medical documentation, and then we're going to wait for the process to continue. We don't send in these reports unless we've been asked to. And that's a good litmus test for me. If I have an adjudicator that is sending function reports to an individual after they've received the packet, I'm like, you haven't read it. Because if you read through our level of need assessment, you would not need the function report. So that just kind of gives me some insight as to kind of where the adjudicator is. You've gotten stuff, or have you gotten stuff, right? So is it possible, even though we sent it, that you didn't get it? So if I get that function report request, then yeah, we'll complete the function report because that's what we've been asked to do. I'm going to send another copy of that level of need and another copy of whatever other documentation we have, just to make sure that the adjudicator has everything, because you can't take it for granted that they've had everything, even if you've submitted everything properly. So they're gonna, sometimes they're sitting on the fence. They will ask for their own assessments, meaning they will send an individual to a psychologist for an evaluation. So typically, if you're at this disability adjudication stage and you've done the function reports and then you get another one, we're going to send them to our psychologist. They're not doing a full-blown psychological evaluation. They're really doing a mental status check. You know, is this person oriented to, you know, time and self and place? Sometimes they administer a Montreal cognitive assessment. And let me tell you, this is a great assessment if you're assessing for dementia. You know, like my mom has this, she's 85 and she's terrified that she's going to develop Alzheimer's. I'm like, Mom, you're sharp as a tack. The fact that you're asking about that shows that, you know, you've got a lot of awareness going on. And I've showed her, you know, what this assessment looks like. And I've even asked, you know, a couple of things. You know, I'll say, Mom, I'm going to give you three things to remember, okay? So, you know, think about a house, a car, and a cat. And then 5 minutes later, hey, Mom, you remember those three things? And she's like, yeah, it was a house, a car, and a cat. So, see, there you go. But that's like the level of this Montreal cognitive assessment. It's not a deep tool. It's not a full scale intelligence scale. It's not an adaptive function assessment. It's just a kind of a quick little mental health assessment. So what does that mean? So if the psychologist is using sort of this light level of testing, what it means is they're most likely going to find that this individual is denied that medical determination of eligibility. This is why it's so important for us to control our narrative by giving them documentation that clearly shows that impact. And if somebody is under someone's treatment of care, then yeah, we want to get the letter from that doctor that's more or less a certification of disability. And particularly if the individual has a mental health issue or co-occurring. Like in my son's case, he has autism and he has bipolar. So while the autism classification is at mental residual functional capacity, mental health is this condition serious and persistent? And what that means is, have we had a diagnosis for more than 2 years? Are we consistently under somebody's treatment of care? Is this condition routinely interrupting or impacting the way this person does their day-to-day activities? So if that condition is serious and persistent, that's simply a different standard that Social Security can look at to get to that determination of medical eligibility. Sometimes it's a little easier to go that route because theoretically that doctor is supposed to have controlling weight. So if you have that doctor going, this is Eric, he's been under my treatment of care since 2016, and here are all his diagnoses. This is what it looks like. His condition is serious and persistent. He's always going to require lifelong supports. He's not able to perform work at a substantial gainful activity level. Bam, that's a certificate of disability. There's your documentation. They should confirm his eligibility at that point. What happens if you lose? If you lose, guys, it's a perseverance game. They bank on a lot of people getting that denial and then going away. Don't go away. Go through the process, request a reconsideration. There's like a couple of forms that you can fill out. You can do this online, and you actually get to upload documents at the reconsideration level. So you can do that appeal online. Part of my strategy for having that other assessment is the review process at reconsideration is basically they're taking the file off of desk A and they're putting it on desk B. So if nothing has materially changed, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to get an approval at the reconsideration phase unless you have provided additional medical documentation. So if we get a denial, that tells me despite everything that we've given them, it wasn't enough. They're looking for more clear and convincing evidence of a significant disability. Then we're going to go get that documentation. If I didn't have a doctor's letter before, I want to get a doctor's letter now. Certainly going to do that diminished mental residual functional capacity adaptive function assessment, because I need to give them something to hang their hat on. I need to let them see what a day in the life looks like, and with that they can understand the limitations that this individual has. So even if you're unsuccessful at that stage, don't give up. Almost half of all the cases are going to get approved at the administrative law judge level, regardless of whether you've added additional documentation or not. And this is because you actually have an opportunity to interact with the judge. You are going, and it's, when I say court, it's not like the big courtrooms that you normally would see. You know, I love administrative law because it's the most user-friendly, laid back kind of law. You know, it's just a room. Okay, it's just a room. It's not this formal witness stand. Nobody's dressed in robes or anything like that. It's not like that. But you have the judge who's going to ask questions. They're going to go through all the documents, and they're trying to understand what's going on. And we had one not too long ago, and the individual, you know, was a little scared and got confused, and his anxiety shot up. And it was like in the first 5 minutes of the hearing, the judge was like, I got it. I see exactly what's going on here. Okay. And of course, you know, we got the verdict later. So yeah, but that can happen. So depending on the nature of the disabling condition and the level of documentation that you may have, you know, you may have to go all the way through that hearing level, but stick it out. It's worthwhile. These are really important benefits. These are life-changing benefits. So make sure that you stick that process out. What happens if you win? Yay! If you win, well, first you celebrate. Yay, we won. And then it's like, okay, what do we need to do? And this is where Social Security is a little wonky. You would think that they would, I don't know, just clarify the communication process a little bit. So many times I get a letter, the individual will call me and say, okay, we got this letter and they want to talk to us. I don't know, you know, should I be concerned? What's going on here? And I was like, oh, okay. What this letter is basically saying is they've gone through that adjudication process and they have approved them medically. But because, remember, it's been 8 to 10 months at least, they're going to go back, they're going to circle back, and they're going to do that financial review again, just to make sure you haven't won the lottery in that 8 to 10 months. So you're never going to just get that notice of award. You're going to have another conversation, and then once you've had that conversation and they clear you financially eligible again, at that point you're going to get the notice of award. So you get the notice of award, yay, and you see that you know, the check has gone into the direct deposit account. You got money sitting there, yay! And you're like, wait a minute. That's not the amount that I thought. I thought the 2022 the maximum award is $841. This is $560. What's going on here? Well, they've applied the 2/3 rule. So there's uh, when an individual is living at home, when they're receiving in-kind support, and then Social Security is going to go, oh, well, you're being subsidized. Thanks, mom and dad. And they're going to lop off 1/3 of the award because they're being subsidized. And so this is the reason why all the families who've gone through Social Security, this is why they have rental agreements. I'm a slumlord mom, when my son first got his award, I'm like, okay, here's our rental agreement. We're going to go through that. Then he got the maximum award, yay. And then what did I do? I hiked up his rent again for a couple of reasons. Mostly because that allowed me to manage his SSI much easier. If he has 841 coming in and I'm taking a big chunk of 750 out each month, okay, that's his rent. That's paying for, his, initially it was just his room. Now it's room, utilities and food, all that good stuff. So that justifies that higher amount. But that's makes it easier for me to keep his balance below $2,000, and it enables me to have a little bit of something to do with whatever I need to do, whether it's to pay out of pocket for this other therapy, or to send them to camp, or to put in an ABLE account for his future. So if any of y'all have received the Social Security award, but you're not receiving the increase yet, please send me an email. I have my little standard handy dandy. This is how you get your increase email, and it has a copy of a rental agreement in it, and it also has a copy of Social Security's form. And I love giving Social Security back their own forms because they're like, oh, okay, I guess I should do this. It just kind of helps push the process on a little bit. So if you need that, just send me an email and I'll send that to you so that you can get that increase. So you got the Social Security award, yay. Now you have the opportunity, kind of like my guy who has a real job now, woohoo. So what do? You got to report the fact that you have earnings. That is a significant, substantial change, the fact that an individual has worked. So I've actually just recently had to go through this process. And again, remember how we talked about SSI and SSDI are radically different programs, and they have radically different rules. The only thing they have in common is that medical determination of disability. Well, this same thing follows through as we're talking about working as a beneficiary, because very, very, very different work incentive programs. SSI is a monthly calculation. Yes, there's math involved. So let's start with SSI first. So you start with gross earnings, gross monthly earnings. So I'm going to just pull out my little calculator and I'm going to use this as we talk. So let's assume that Eric was making $1,000. Woohoo! Good money, Eric. So he's got $1,000. We're going to deduct a $20 general income exclusion. We're going to deduct a $65 earned income exclusion. That brings it down to $915. Then I'm going to deduct impairment related work incentives. So what could that be? Well, if he were still a student, if he were still in school and he was working, I could deduct a heck of a lot, because they have a student earned income exclusion, almost $7,000, a little more than $7,000 annually that I can deduct. Okay, well, Eric's 29, so that's not going to apply. But he doesn't drive, which means that he's going to have to get to work. So if he's taking an Uber to get to work, then I can use that as an expense, an impairment related work expense. So let's say that he spends $200 in transportation. I'm going to deduct that. So that brings it down to 715. You're like, wow, that's really close to 841. Not, you get to divide it in half. So you divide that in half, and that's $357.50. Okay, so that's what's being deducted from the 841. So he's going to have roughly half of his SSI plus earnings. When you have SSI, it's almost always a better financial outcome when you're working. Even if he'd work at a point where his income goes down to zero, he's going to be able to maintain his Medicaid with a 1619B exception. So yay, and that's automatic. Woohoo! SSDI is completely different. SSDI is like, it's phases. I call it like leaving the train station. So you get your award, you're at the train station, you get on the train, choo choo. The first stop is the trial work period. So we have 9 times of an individual working. If you work at that trial work period level, which is 970, and in our little scenario, Eric was over 970, right? So that means he's used one of his trial work period months if he had SSDI. During that trial work period, what Social Security is basically trying to do is see how much can you work. So they have fewer rules and restrictions. So you have 9 times under that trial work period. From there, you have 36 consecutive months of extended period of eligibility, where it's more like it's all or nothing. If it's above substantial gainful activity, which is currently 1,350, he doesn't get his SSDI check. If it's below, he does, and so forth. So SSDI is all these phases. This is a lot. I could do a whole other session just on this topic. It gets kind of complicated. What you need to know is if your child is an SSA beneficiary and they're working, they should have a benefits counselor to help guide them through all this process. You can download the Social Security Red Book that has all the rules and regulations for working with Social Security. So you just look at it. Blue Book is all things how to get benefits, and then the Red Book are all the rules as a Social Security beneficiary who's working. Make sure you get that counselor. We have 3 WIPA providers in Georgia. It's all done by county. You go through the Ticket to Work helpline. They screen for eligibility, and then they make the referral to the appropriate agency. And then how does BDI help? Well, the benefits acquisition side helps provide that guidance and support. We do those assessments. On complex cases, I do what's called a medical evidentiary review. If I got tons of stuff and it's hard to make sense, I just know that the adjudicator is going to give up and go, forget that. So I will write a summary and put all the documents in the appropriate chronology and demonstrate the impact in that evidentiary review. So that's just another thing that we do. We help resolve overpayment issues, and we're also one of the 3 WIPA providers. So yay, that's BDI. And here's my contact information if you have any questions or want any additional supports. Anna.Maki, don't forget the dot, and Maki, M-A-K-I, no C, at bobbydodd.org. So again, if you need any assistance with any initial applications, or if you're in an overpayment situation, please reach out to me. If you are, if you have that, you got the award, but you don't have the max, please send me an email so I can send you that little how-to packet. That's it. Yay.
Anna, thank you so much. At this moment, there are no questions in the chat box. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to type in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask Anna.
Hello, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, let me see how I can make sure I can hear. Okay, my question is, I made note that we should have a letter from the psychiatrist if we have one. What if my son, he has a psychiatrist and a psychologist? Would it be beneficial for a letter from both or just one?
let's see what all you have. Like when was your last psychological evaluation?
The psychological was done in 2021, senior year of high school, and it was done by the psychologist he sees now. She was a student at oh, I can't call the name, at the Autism Center in Atlanta. And so
Okay.
she signed off with it with the psychologist that she was under. She went into private practice later on that summer, and he became her client, and he still sees her
That's awesome.
regularly. And then a few months ago, he needed the psychiatrist for medication management. And so he's
Okay.
had at least 2 sessions with the psychiatrist. And I must say, yeah, with the psychiatrist. He has appointment next week with both. And I just
Mhm.
need to kind of know, how do I steer them to let them know we want to
Sure.
apply, and maybe help them to help us. So just
Right.
let you know, at this point, do I get
Absolutely.
from one, both? How do I start the
Well,
conversation?
let's see, where are you in the process? Is this an initial application or is this a reconsideration?
Initial.
This is initial. And is the primary condition autism?
Yes.
And is there any co-occurring conditions? Is there any?
Yes. Depression and anxiety.
Okay. All right. So yeah, what I would recommend is you're going to come at this with all your guns a-blazing, okay? Bam, bam, bam.
Okay.
So, you use that psychological evaluation that you had before. You may even have previous psych evals that you might want to use as well.
The previous one was like 3rd grade. And then that's when we realized, oh, we need something more updated. He's a senior,
Yeah.
so that's
I'm
the
so
only
glad
other
that
one we have. Should we still send that one to Anna?
Yeah. This is what I'm going to ask you to do is go ahead and scan them and email them to me, just so I can look at them, because I want to look at all the scores that are in that psych eval. Because if we got accompanying intellectual impairment, or if we have an extremely low adaptive function score, or if we have extremely low executive function, there are some things that we can pull out of that evaluation to highlight. Okay. So go ahead, if you don't mind, you can just go ahead and send me that evaluation. Is he receiving any other services? Is he on the now call planning list?
No. And I must say, I have emailed you in the past.
Mhm.
And so, but the now comp waiver, they denied him initially, saying it's adopted function too high. I think he's at 78 off the top of my head. So family support, we do get that.
Okay.
With family support services. And so that gives the 3,000 that we use mainly to help with
The reason
lift.
that's important is if you're receiving services from some other agency, that's because you get Social Security is its own little tower, right? But if you're
Okay.
receiving any services like family support, that's through the Department of Behavioral Health, right? If you're
Yes.
receiving services through Voc Rehab, that's the Department of Labor. So anytime you're receiving services from these other agencies, that acts as good supplemental documentation to show the impact. It's like, look, and it's like implicit reciprocity. Hey, Social Security, because the Department of Labor has determined that my guy is a priority 1 case, you should also view his case as having a significant impact. See what I mean?
Okay. Yes,
So
ma'am. And we have the Voc Rehab plan where he has the counselor, and
awesome.
this summer he's supposed to have the CWAT, the Community Work Adjustment Training.
Yeah, awesome. Good. Okay. So he's probably look for that letter that you got like before you did the service plan with Voc Rehab. You should have received a letter from Voc Rehab that's saying he's a priority 1. So that's going to be good documentation. His service plan can be good documentation. And the same thing on the side of family support. You got a letter showing that he's been approved for family support. That's good documentation to show impact.
Okay. And
So,
how can I hire you so that you can help walk me through this process, Anna?
just send me an email, and let's see what your needs are.
Okay.
I generally don't charge for a lot of my talks and whatnot. If I do what I call it real work, like if I'm doing an assessment for you, that's real work. If I do a medical evidentiary review, those evidentiary reviews take me a minute. That's real
Mhm.
work. I almost always charge for that kind of stuff. But send me an email, and let's see what you got.
Okay.
And we'll see if you need my help. You may not need my help. If you've got everything ready, I'll let you know. You're okay. I'm not gonna take.
Okay.
I
So
don't wanna,
just send you
I wanna
like
help you.
send you like the vote rehab plan, send you the
Yeah.
family support. Okay.
Pretend I'm Social Security. Okay.
Okay.
Pretend I'm Social Security, and send me everything that you would send to Social Security. And then that way
Okay.
I can look at it, put on my little adjudicator hat, and I'm going to go, yeah, I think you got it, or no, we're too borderline. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
And
Thank you, because I
can
feel
make
overwhelmed. I don't mind doing the work. I can do the
Right,
work, but I just feel so overwhelmed at this moment. So, but I can send it all to you, because each thing I got took so much with vote rehab. It took so
Yeah.
much with everything. So I can gladly send it, because it's a win to get it. And I'll
Yeah.
send it
It
to
is
you.
a win to get it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And hang in there. This is daunting. It's scary. It's time consuming. It's frustrating. It's just like, none of us chose this. And it's almost like, just to add insult to injury, we have to jump through all these hoops all the time. I mean, it's a lot, and I get it. I do. So hang in there. I'm here to support you in this, because it was hard, and I'm fortunate. I have a legal background, and I have a clinical background, and it was still hard. And I'm like, dear God, what do families do? Because it's hard, and it's overwhelming. It's emotionally draining, because I want to talk about cute my guy is. I want to talk about how he has nice manners, and we work really hard on nice manners. And it's hard and emotionally draining to talk about all the things he can't do. And I think we lose sight of that when we go through this process. That's what we're asking parents to do. Yet again, we're dwelling on the things that they can't do. And that's hard. It's
Yes.
emotionally hard. So I want you to know I'm sensitive to that, and I want to support you any way I can.
Well, thank you. You've been helpful with your training. I participated in a previous one, but it's so much to digest. So the more I listen, the more nuggets I can extrapolate and gain. And so I'm glad to send you what I have, and ask for you to give me some pointers and recommendations. And I talk with the doctor and psychologist next week. I usually come in at the end of his session. The last 5 minutes, he usually allows me to, come in. And I want to bring that up to them, that's what we want to do. And I just didn't know how to bring that up and ask them. Do I ask them for anything specific?
Yeah. And you just email that to me. I will
Okay.
also email you some language to suggest to that doctor. Okay.
Thank
Because
you.
We got co-occurring here. So I really want to we're going to reference the autism, but we're also going to talk about these other conditions. And I want to make sure we got that serious and persistent language in there. There's some buzzwords that we want to put in there to make sure that the adjudicator can check the boxes. If you just think about that adjudicator as somebody in a room who's never going to talk to your kid, they're never going to talk to your kid, and yet they're making this decision on behalf of your kid. We've got to be really scrupulous and careful to make sure we're giving them enough content that they can check their boxes. Okay. So that's
yes.
what we want to do. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That is my question. I don't want to take up everybody's chance with you, and I will follow up with an email. And I thank you and Focus so much for this opportunity.
You're so welcome. My
Thank
pleasure.
you, Sheree. Anna, your next question is, how do I claim the Uber rides as an expense on a monthly SSI filings?
Okay. You have to have the receipt. So, and this is where I have this love-hate relationship with Social Security, because that it's the parents that are doing most of the driving, right? They won't let you do the deduction if it's a parent. But if it's somebody else, a non-parent, then you can, in my situation, we didn't actually use Uber. We used a care provider, and I created a receipt, and I basically did the math for them. I'm like, okay, so this is the starting address. This is the end address. We're using I think it's 58.5 is the national mileage rate, you know, from point A to point B. Yeah, it is 25 miles, you know, so if you do the math, and that's what this is, like $14.62 one way. So and they will only compensate when the person is in the car. So let's say if you have somebody who's a family friend that you're paying to take them, you can charge for the time that the individual is in the car, but that return trip home, not so much. And that's very similar to Uber. You know, Uber doesn't only charges you for the time that the person is in the car. So you got to have that receipt. And it doesn't happen automatically. When you're reporting your earnings, you say, okay, these are my pay stubs for the month. Okay, so here's my gross earnings. And here are my receipts for transportation as an impairment related work expense. And then you just slide it under the plexiglass or mail it in. There are in that red book, there are going to be other things that you may be able to do. There was a point in time when I was paying out of pocket for some of my son's meds, and they were the meds that directly related to his condition, not like Advil, not like Claritin, you know, like Risperdal, you know, that kind of medication that we were paying out of pocket for. So I was able to take that receipt and go, he needs this medication in order to focus at work. So it's an impairment related work expense, but you have to have the receipts. The receipts are everything.
Yeah, and you have to file it with them. Like you have to take it into them. You can't do it on their app. There's no way to file an expense. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Correct.
Yeah, the transportation is killing us. It's just killing us. Thank you.
Sure.
Anna, another question is, I have heard that if a parent takes early retirement at age 62 and applies for Social Security, that there are advantages for the dependent child with a disability, such as the child getting access to Medicare. Have you heard of this? Do you have anything else to say about getting Social Security early as it applies to the disabled child?
Right. That's where you got to crunch the numbers, because here's the thing. Think about how much money you're supporting your child each month. They got SSI, but then let's say if you were to remember, they're going to be eligible for 50%. So what does your award look like now at early retirement versus full retirement? And it's like my full retirement age is 67, but if I hold out to 70, then it's a lot more, which means that half of that is a lot more. So you just got to run the numbers to figure out if that's going to be advantageous. There is that 2-year waiting period. So for Medicare, so you just want to be cautious about that. And guys, I'm still learning more about this other Medicare plan. So I've been working with a financial planner who's let me know this, and I've gotten some information. If you want to learn more about that, please send me an email, and I'm going to basically do an email introduction to this person, because they can explain it a little better than I can. And it's something that what I'm trying to do, like right now I'm on private health, and I have private health insurance through work, and Eric's on my health insurance and he has Medicaid, but I'm trying to do this cost benefit analysis between, this is the primary insurance that we have, which is if this is going to be better for him, and if I can find, if his doctors are going to take this, then I might make a switch. I might drop him off of my primary and put him on this Medicare plan, even though I'm not on SSDI. So there's different kinds of Medicare plans. So we want to look at that as well. Like your straight Medicare that you're going to get compared to this Medicare plan. I hope that helped. It's a little convoluted.
Thank you, Anna. If anyone has any, oh, we do have one more question. Does the 9-month trial period work only to apply with the child with SSDI, not SSI?
That's exactly right. SSI is a monthly calculation, and SSDI is like the train. You're first going to do the trial work period, and I like to say 9 times because, you know, right now that trial work level is 970. So let's assume Eric had earned $1,000 in October. That would be a trial work period month. But let's say next month, you know, he takes a break off for Thanksgiving or whatnot, and he's earning $800. That's not a trial work period month. So you have to go month by month. If you have SSDI and you're working, you want a spreadsheet, okay? You want to have a spreadsheet like this is month 1 where I was working, and this was my gross monthly earnings. And you want a copy of those pay stubs, even though you have to send those pay stubs to Social Security when you're reporting your earnings. You want to keep a copy of them because, guys, Social Security loses stuff and they screw stuff up. And so they're just going to go, oh, well, we have records of him working for 10 years. I'm like, no, he's worked for 1 year, and here's what I've got. Here's our tax reports and yada, yada. So just recognize that that burden is going to fall to you to demonstrate the documentation. But if you have that spreadsheet, that's going to help you see, you know, how this all works. And where I see it happen the most is when individuals who are on SSDI and they're with an employer. You know, some employers have like a 2 paycheck a month schedule, and then some it's just every other week, which means that there are going to be some months that have 5 weeks in them that they may get an extra paycheck, and then that month that threw them over maybe substantial gainful activity. And so those are things that we want to document so we can show to Social Security, no, it's not that they're really earning a lot more. It's simply the fact that this was a 5-week month. So it gets complicated pretty quickly when an individual is working with Social Security benefits. And that's why having that WIPA counselor is going to be very important. That process involves, you know, we mentioned going to the Ticket to Work to get a referral. You'll also sign a 3288 form, which allows that counselor to talk to Social Security on your behalf. And then there's also a process where you have to get it's called a BPQY, a benefits planning query, because the counselor is going to have to verify all your benefits before they can give counsel on how to manage those benefits. So it's sort of a convoluted process, but it's really important. But you can do your due diligence by maintaining that spreadsheet, keeping track of the gross monthly earnings each month so that you can figure out, especially if you have SSDI, which months did I use my trial work periods, which months, where did my extended period of eligibility begin? And then that way you have that record that you can also share with Social Security in the event that their information for whatever reason is incorrect. So maintain your own records. Yeah.
Thank you, Anna, so much. There are no other questions at this time, but we not only appreciate you sharing our knowledge with our parents, but thank you again for keeping us on your calendar while you are in conference in Florida. So we just really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. I'm sorry for all the sound. I found the quietest place I could, and it wasn't that quiet. But thanks for your patience with me. And seriously, y'all have any questions, just send me an email. I'm happy to help.